I'll be your master of ceremonies for this evening. My name's Ed Crooks. I'm the US Industry and Energy Editor at the FT. A nice, modest beat on the basis that the more important you are, the shorter your job title is. You can tell I'm not a very important person at the Financial Times, but still it's a great honour and a privilege for me to be able to be here and meeting some of you and talking to you tonight. As I said, I'm the MC. What the format of the evening is, we're going to get started on dinner, and then you're going to have the cabaret over your dessert, which is going to be our discussion panel, provided by what I think should be an extremely interesting panel, some very impressive people we've got to talk to you. And hopefully what we'll do, we also obviously have a very impressive audience in the House tonight overall, having looked at the guest list, and so it'd be great to get a kind of a good kind of free-flowing discussion going, and hopefully we'll have as many questions as possible from the floor, and as I say, involve everyone in the discussion. As I say, though, we're going to have, just to kind of start us off, if you like, we have this panel who are going to be up here talking to you as your dessert. And as apart from myself, we have Todd Gibbons, who's the CFO at BNY Mellon, the investment management company. We have BK Kalra, who's the business leader for consumer goods, retail and life sciences at Genpact. Genpact, who are the sponsors of this evening, and thank you very much indeed for that. And we have Eduardo Cordero, who's the CFO at Cabot Corporation, the advanced materials company based in Boston. And last but by no means least, James Lusk, who's the CFO at ABM Industries, which is the facilities management group, as probably many of you know, one of the largest in the United States. So, as I say, very much looking forward to the evening. Hope you are too. Should be a good night, and I'll be talking to you all later. Thanks a lot. See you soon. As I said, we have a panel to talk about this issue about the changing role of the CFO, and some very interesting speakers we've got for you. If starting down the far left, just to remind you of who we've got here, down the far left, James Lusk of ABM Industries. Then to his right, it's Eduardo Cordero from Cabot Corporation. Then, sorry, to his right, rather, to his right, it's BK Kalra from Genpact. And on my immediate left here, Todd Gibbons from BNY Mellon. Perhaps, gentlemen, if I could just ask you today just a very few words to introduce yourselves. I know, James, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'll go by Jim.
Jim, certainly.
Yep, Jim, James, whatever you want to call me. I'll give you my personal philosophy about business, which kind of is the context for which I think about things. I think about my job as OC equals FE, operational cause equals financial effect. I mean, to drive numbers, you really need to understand the business, and every business is obviously different. The equal sign is, no accounting cocaine, making sure you follow the rules and everything. But to really have the numbers you want, you really need to understand the business. And that's just kind of the way I think about things. And every business is different. I spent 20 years in high tech in a Fortune 25 company, and now I'm in a services company with 115,000 employees. But the things that we do every day are similar, but the problems are very different. But I think as you think about your role, you really have to understand the business, and do what you do good every day. So that's kind of the context I bring to the table.
Great, thank you. Eddie?
Great. Well, that was a great intro, and I'll maybe pick up a little bit on that. So I've been the CFO of Cabot for about 5 years, and I've been at the company for 15 years. And I have a bit of a non-traditional CFO background, which is I really came out of business and management consulting. And to pick up on Jim's point, I couldn't agree more that as a finance leader, I have encouraged all of the financial executives in our company that you really need to be the person who really drives the business. You can't be looking backwards. You have to be looking forwards. Part of your responsibility is to report what happened, but a much greater responsibility is in pushing forward and pushing your business managers, your financial people, your CEO forward. One of the things we do at Cabot to develop that sense within our finance people is a lot of rotations. And so I spent 5 years in finance, and then I spent 5 years in general management. I used to run 2 of our larger businesses. and then I went back to a strategy function, and then to become the CFO of the company. And I couldn't agree more, particularly, as the title of the panel describes, unlocking value in volatile times. As you think about volatile times, you have to keep doing the things you're doing because we've been in business for 130 years, and we need to keep investing. And the only way you can keep investing is if you really understand your business, your industry, your markets, how they evolve over time, so you can make those decisions, particularly in the most volatile of times. So,
thank you. BK.
Well, thanks so much. And as Jim mentioned, and thanks, Andy, thanks for the introduction. So nobody calls me by my name, so you can call me BK as well.
We tried, but we failed.
Yeah, many have failed, so you're not new. Thanks for that. So I've been with Genpact, just with two organizations, Genpact for about 14 years, earlier 6 years in investment banking. And as you talk about some of the foresight that we need to bring in volatile times, actually, as we work with many of our customers, I think that's one of the toughest part that we see with many large and medium-sized organizations. And we do our bit to get them there, but it is one of the toughest part to think about the business drivers and thereby take the decisions, as volatile times are probably the new normal, and they'll stay for a long time, and we need to adjust to that normal. So,
Thank you. Todd?
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. As a banker, a free meal is certainly something that I reach out for. So, and we've had a great discussion here at dinner. But as I look at our company, and things are changing so dramatically, not just for us here in the U.S., but globally. I really feel as a finance officer, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've been with BNY Mellon for 26 years. But as a finance officer, it really comes down to what I would say is three things. One is people, one is process, and the other is technology. And in terms of people, I think, and I'm sorry to say this, but I'm almost going to echo exactly what you heard. There's a tendency to want to report the past. There's a tendency to want to describe what went on rather than looking at the data and taking from that what's changing, what our clients are doing, how they're using our facilities, how the world is changing, and what I would call kind of connecting the dots. So the more that we can take the reporting and the historical and almost the operational aspect of our jobs and automate them, and the more we can direct to the advisory component of our jobs. And I think that is the challenge, especially in this volatile times when things are changing quickly. If you don't see it and don't connect the dots and don't have the information, whether it's gathering it from the big data concepts, from whether it's gathering what's going on, how your clients are using your systems, you're going to slip behind very quickly because it is extremely competitive.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, and to pick up some of those ideas, BK, I was very interested. You gave me some notes about the kind of things you wanted to talk about this evening, and I was very struck by how wide-ranging they were in terms of the kind of things you suggested that CFOs should be interested in, and actually mentioning exactly some of the same ones that Todd's just been talking about here. Thinking about people, thinking about process management, and a lot of things, I guess, which would not traditionally be regarded as the sphere of the CFO. Why is that? I mean, why is it that you think they should be taking on those kind of responsibilities and being interested in those kind of areas?
Yeah, so I think, and I'll pick on what Todd mentioned, and I think you mentioned three things, Todd: people, process, and technology. I'll add another fourth one because we see it that way with many of our customers that we work with, as policy as well, as a four-legged stool that we see. And as we go through and work it out with many of our customers and see how they are working, a lot of times technology gets a lot of precedence. And in our experience, actually, unless until you sort process, policy, and organizational design and people, technology just gets you there, but still doesn't get you anywhere. And that's where I think, coming back to the point of how do we have leverage of process as we go along. And so so we work with a spectrum of companies, and some of the best-in-class companies that we get to see from our vantage point, the finance and business leaders, they always not just look at some of the key outcome metrics as an EBITDA or EPS or return on capital or many clear metrics of outcomes that are very important in the market. But more important is what also converts the business plans and the operational efficiency into cash, as well as the business processes behind it. And unless until those business processes of, even from a CFO standpoint, order to cash, record to report, or business plan, or the entire planning processes, are seen in the detail, the value is lost. So even if you standardize, the value is lost unless until you unlock and see what needs to come in to make sure that the processes come through.
Okay, so I mean, my initial thought when I hear you talk like that, and some of these ideas you've just been talking about, isn't that what general management is about? Well, what is the distinctive contribution then of the CFO in that kind of context? If essentially you're saying they're meant to be understanding the business in that very broad way, what is it actually that the CFO is kind of contributing to to an executive team that couldn't be contributed by somebody else?
I think one of the key roles, as I see, is holder of a decision-making process. The decision-making process, there are many biases that walk in as you go through, and some of them cognitive, some of them you don't even know. And I think executing it through the process gives CFO actually a very distinctive position to unlock value for the organization as compared to some of biases that you don't even know.
Eddie, so you're saying you've done both jobs. You've been in kind of general management role and then also in specifically finance roles. What's the difference?
It's a great question. I was just thinking in my head, what's the difference? And I approached the CFO's role very much the way I approached the general manager's role, as though I'm running the business, running the company. But I think there is an element of you can be somewhat distant and impartial. So if you have the ability to think like a general manager, you can go into a business and think about it from a general management perspective, give your views, opinions, advice. Here's how I would make that call, how I'd make that decision. But you also have to play the role of the arbiter and decision maker because you are somewhat impartial, you have all the information, and you have a certain responsibility to the corporation to make sure that, well, you're not just part of that little organization. You're there to support the organization and give your best advice, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to, it's not quite a policeman's role, but it's definitely a role of a middleman at times.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I would say as the CFO, you're responsible for making by applying a very disciplined process around the capital investment decisions and a lot of business decisions, because there are a number of good ideas that will permeate the company, and they'll be presented, and unless it's the CFO giving an unbiased perspective, providing the metrics, the analytics, and then prioritizing what it is that you can and can't do, it will end up being chaos, especially when you got multiple businesses. So I think it's incumbent upon the finance team to help assess the various investment alternatives and where we're going to place our chips, and prioritize them, and make sure that it's done in a consistent way that the business managers understand and eventually even embrace, even if they understand where the capital is going and why it's going there, and what they need to do, to have the capital directed in their direction.
And the only way you can do that, play that role effectively then, is if you really do understand the business and all the different aspects of the business in the way you've been talking about.
When you build that metric and when you're doing the performance or the potential analysis of what a business operation is going to do, you really have to understand the underlying. It gets back to what Jim said from the very beginning. You have to understand the underlying drivers of that business and the risks associated with those drivers. So what are the potential outcomes? So it's not just, you're not just doing a simple IRR, but you're doing a spectrum of outcomes and what you think the likely ones could be and the executability of a plan. So if you don't have a relatively deep knowledge of it, you're not really well positioned to drive the decision.
Jim.
One of the, as a CFO, you really have a privilege to kind of see the whole business. And if you're linked with your CEO, you know, a lot of companies have COOs, ours don't. So what I'm saying, sometimes a COO does, but a CFO should do. If you really understand the strategy of the company, which you really need to do, and you understand the risk profile you're willing to live with in that strategy, you know, how much debt you want to take on, all the various risk profiles. Out of that comes the 4 or 5 things the business should focus on. You know, then out of that comes individual objectives, and then, you know, the budget at the very end. But we get to sit over, we get to see how the entire company works. And if you have a good enough relationship with your CEO and all the rest of your operational peers, you really can make a big difference because you see the connections that really nobody else sees. So I really like what you said. I mean, our job really is to drive the business. When I look at my team and even my peers, I think about a value triangle. And for example, just if you ask a payroll clerk what their job is, they'll say, well, you know, our job is to get a good paycheck out. And that to me is kind of the table stakes at the bottom of a value triangle. The highest being, you know, being a strategic partner. Having good people, having good processes is great. But what do you see every day as you process stuff? I call it synthesis. I forget what somebody else called it up here, but if you see receivables extending, you know, are you thinking about what's happening in the economy? You're talking about people. So what trends do you see, et cetera? But that's not enough either. If you see a trend, you know, with maybe DPOs, you know, getting too short because you're paying too fast, or DSOs getting too long, are you as the clerk or anybody, you know, looking at those trends? But that's not enough either. The key is, what are the 3 things that you're going to do to reverse that trend? And that's not enough either, because are you going to actually own it and drive it to a solution? And I think once you do that, then you become a strategic partner for the business. And you want everybody to think that way, tied to the strategy. So when you ask a payroll clerk what's their job, yes, their job is to get a good paycheck out, but it's to get a good paycheck out so the sales guy doesn't have to worry about it, so the sales guy sells, so the operational person does what they do, and really connecting every person with the strategy of the company. And I mean, that's the way I look at my team, and I look at the value we deliver. And it's, I mean, it's not that hard really, but getting people connected with the business, because that's why we're here every day. You know, it's not just about the rules and the regulations. That's the equal sign of my operational cause equals financial effect. And I'm sure you guys would agree. The job is a lot more fun when you're thinking about the strategy. Yeah, we got to think about cash flow. We got to think about capital allocation. But, you know, growing and, I mean, it makes the job a lot more rewarding. And that's, you know, that's how you survive in these jobs, actually, more than a couple of years.
And also, by the sounds of it, more demanding. I mean, these sound like extremely kind of demanding roles when you think about all the the factors you have to take into account and consideration, and that kind of, as you say, back to where you very first came in, talking about the knowledge of the business. Does that mean CFOs need to be different kinds of people now? And I guess particularly one thing I'm interested in is you know, obviously you have seen and you've sort of kind of thought of people as being sort of finance specialists, and people would have a kind of a career path where they are finance specialists and perhaps generalists between different businesses and different industries. And whether that kind of model is now changing, and that's a kind of not so much a viable career path anymore as it used to. I mean, so Jim, you're saying you made that jump then from a tech business to a services business. Was that an easy thing to do?
I mean, like in my tech business, I worried about receivables. I worried about process. In this company, my operational guys are so good at receivables, I don't worry about that anymore. But I do worry about a lot of other things. So I think if you approach it, I mean, we're all finance professionals, so you got to be good at what you do. You got to understand accounting, you got to understand finance, understand treasury, but that's all in service of return to your shareholders, or if you're a private company, return to the owners of the company. And that's why you're in business, so you can never forget that. So the strategy is just really, really important. So I think you just got to be a business person. And I mean, I'm good at finance and I'm good at accounting and all that, but I really love being part of a business. That's what kind of gets me up in the morning. I love getting individuals as part of teams and doing stuff. And I think if you think about your job that way, it's just a lot more fun. It's a lot more rewarding, and you got to be a business person first. Otherwise, you're just a support group. And if you're a support group, you're a cost center, and it's not a lot of fun.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the role evolves with the times. And, if I sort of think back to the early part of the 2000s, it was much more of an accounting role, with Enron and SOX being implemented and a lot of these things. I think a lot of CFOs became accountants, or people were hiring strong accounting background CFOs for some period of time, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years. With the downturn in 2009 and coming out of the downturn in 2009, I observed more people, boards, CEOs looking for operationally focused CFOs, people who understood what drove the business, how to manage during volatility, how to manage cash, with some strategy as well. I agree. I mean, I don't think I would be interested in the job if it didn't have the strategy component to it. But the operational component adds another dimension, which is more akin to running a business. And so when you can add, all of that to the more traditional financial disciplines, then it becomes a very interesting place to be.
Todd?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would say the core finance operations and accounting. We've made significant investments in it. That's the foundation. That's the table stakes. You have to be good at that, especially now, because investors can lose confidence if you ever had a Sarbox issue or any kind of an accounting issue. So I think building rock solid controls, transparent reporting, externally, solid investor relations. That's the foundation. But it's not going to drive the value add for the organization. That's looking outward as well as inward, recognizing where the opportunities are. I think the connection across the businesses. We're seeing a lot of opportunities. We have 4 or 5 businesses, and where we're seeing the opportunities in our business, and I think finance is really helping to drive this strategically, is across the seams of the businesses. So they do similar things. And we realize that with the changing regulations, our clients need different type of services, and they're services that we need to bring 2 or 3 of our businesses together to provide. And I think that was finance that first recognized that, and it becomes a differentiator. So because we get the perspective of the entire organization. So I think you can't even think about anything else unless you build the basic foundation of a rock solid accounting and reporting capability. But beyond that, once you have the perspective that you get with both the forecasting, budgeting, and just regular review of the business activities, it puts you in a position to connect the dots, especially if you're looking externally, both through your IR and your strategic efforts, of seeing what's going on in the world and what else you might be able to create to differentiate your business and provide some value.
And as you said, not just a cost center, which is a very nice way of thinking about it, I think. So, BK.
No, I completely agree with the panel. I think increasingly, so that role only occurred in the past where it was more accounting. It is more a business manager, more a general manager role, where you have to have a strong foundation and then build up. And the vantage point that exists at a CFO role is just unparalleled, and it connects the dot. And connecting the dot and making it actually come live even for the CEO is just absolutely unparalleled.
I wanted to interrogate something else we've been mentioning a couple of times here, which is this issue of volatility and kind of changing times and so on, which seems like one of those things that people always say, changes aren't permanent, but changes. Everyone always seems to think that the particular period we're living in is more volatile than any other that's ever gone before. And maybe they're right, but as I say, it certainly seems to be a constant. Question, is there really more volatility now? And if there is, in what ways are things changing, and what are the kind of, the new demands that it's creating? Any thoughts? Jim.
At least from my perspective, the economy is very opaque. And I think all the CFOs I talk to are struggling with organic growth. So, how do you keep the business growing? So I think in volatile times, what we all tend to do is hunker down on costs, which we're all pretty good at. I think businesses from all the peers I talk to are about as efficient. There's not a whole lot of efficiency you can squeeze out of business anymore. But at the end of the day, you have to grow. You can't cut your way to profitability. You do have to grow your way to profitability. But in volatile times, you tend to look at the cost side. You tend to look at all the debits and maybe not as much at the credits. So I think how do you help the business to grow while you get the most efficiency out of your processes and systems, et cetera? That's the tough thing. Having spent 20 years in high tech and watching it go like this and watching it go like that, I think a CFO role, when things are going great, you can do a great job. When things are going bad, everybody knows what to do, you cut costs. It's when you're at the inflection points. It's when revenue's going like this, expenses are going like this, revenue tilts, and then expenses keep going. So I think the key with volatile times is when are you at the inflection point? Either the downturn or the upturn. If you're at the upturn, which I guess we're all hoping we see some of that, maybe we'll do a little more investing, get ahead of your competition, get a little more organic growth, get the acquisition before somebody else is out. So I think that's the first derivative of calculus, right? When is that inflection point? That's the hard part. We all know what to do when things are bad. We all know what to do when things are great. It's just the volatility and where is it going to shift. I think that's how you get ahead of competition, and that's what we're all saying. Just knowing the business and knowing the competition, knowing the industry, and I think that's the companies that are going to do the best in the volatility.
Thanks. Eddie?
Yeah, no, I think times are definitely more volatile. I think the main issue is it's just very hard to know what your customers really are expecting. Your customers don't really know. And so when your customers can't tell you, then you need to sort of sit back and say, okay, how can we model this out and think about, what's the likelihood of what demand could look like, so that you can plan your supply chain, you can plan your production. The investment side's a little bit different. We make investments that last 50 years. We were granted the first permit in the Marshall Plan and built a plant in Stanlow, England in the late 1940s. Yeah. And so that's how old some of these assets last. And so we're making investment decisions for many decades. But you have to be careful because you can't obviously load up on investment during a time, as Jim said, when demand may be coming down. And it really gets back to how well do you really understand your market and your business, and how can you pace that investment? How can you manage it through what is an uncertain demand period? And then the other thing I would just say is that one of the things that the finance organization specifically has embarked on at Cabot, and I'm sure through most organizations, is some type of a risk management process. So ERM became this sort of hot buzzword that I think people use for the last few years. Some people do it in a paper fashion, and other people embed it more deeply into an organization. We've done it for probably 7 or 8 years, and it started as a sort of paper exercise that was done top down. We now build it into our planning process, which is really owned by the finance organization. And it's kind of interesting because, throughout the world, we have 40-plus sites in more than 30 countries. And, I will get at every single site, from every single site manager, I'll get a list of what they think the key risks are. And I'll look at all of them and prioritize them. I'll say, oh, that's one I didn't think about. I'll put that on the radar screen. And every now and then, it actually comes back and, yep, that was a risk that we at the executive team didn't have on our radar, and it's actually something that materialized. So it's another process that you can use to try to manage some of the volatility, from year to year.
That's very interesting. And that's all run through the finance function?
Entirely, yeah. I mean, with contact into the business, but it's embedded into the planning process. It comes up through the regions, it comes up through the businesses, and eventually gets to my level.
BK?
I was reflecting on, as you were talking about that, I was with the CFO of a large multinational company. He said, this is the most opportunistic time for us. And it'll be sheer waste in case we didn't use this opportunity.
Right.
And to drive change, to make costs far more variable, to get to a very different cost structure. And I think the other thing that as I talk to many of CFOs, I think in those volatile times, there are opportunities that are in different geographies, and there are risks in many geographies and many markets. And identifying them and placing different bets is another key aspect from a CFO role to guide the entire organization and steer the organization in the right direction.
Well, I was going to ask, in fact, about exactly that issue, about globalization. I mean, it just feels like, it doesn't feel like the data back it up, that American business is much more globalized now than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The world economy is much more significant. Everyone's selling in a lot of different markets around the world. People have to care about parts of the world that perhaps that they didn't have to care about and weren't interested in 10 or 20 years ago. How does that change the CFO's role then? Is that another kind of, particularly a new responsibility that people have to really take on?
Well, it adds a tremendous amount of complexity. So you have now currency issues, you have political issues, investment becomes more difficult, particularly in a capital-intensive industry. Growth becomes potentially more attractive. So, a lot of people will ask me, what do I think of the economy? And I usually have to ask them which one, because we only have 20% of our revenues in the U.S. now, and a similar amount of assets in the U.S. And so that helps because, we're benefiting from growth outside of the U.S. But anytime there's a road bump almost anywhere in the world, we feel it. If there's a currency issue in Brazil, we feel it. If something is going on in Indonesia, if there's a financial issue in Indonesia or a demand issue in Indonesia, we'll feel it as well. So it's a much more complex role as you get into that. You also have the opportunity to do a lot of different things with tax structures, legal entity structures, intercompany lending. It opens up a whole wealth of opportunities for you to operate in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The complexity is geometric, though, as you do expand globally. And we also have a global business. About 40% of our revenues are outside of North America. I was thinking back on these 50-year investments. We have a few of them. We didn't intend them to be 50-year investments when we made those particular loans, but some of them did take. But we're actually in an industry that's facing very dramatic change right now from a regulatory perspective. What activities we can and can't do, what our clients. We're a bank, but we really serve the financial institution and pension funds and investment managers and so forth. And their business opportunities are changing dramatically. There's not a lot we can look at from an M&A perspective, and historically that's how you've kind of changed perspective. But what that's forced us to do is do two things internally. One, look at organic growth opportunities. What services can we provide our clients that are suffering from some of the regulatory environment? And it really has created some opportunities. So, and the thing is, you got to move quickly because the advantage will go pretty quickly. So that's one alternative. And then something that everyone's alluded to. You're also, you take these slow times as an ability to make your operations, re-engineer your operations a bit and make them more and more efficient. So I think super disciplined through a period like this, you will see, what's interesting is we actually now have a list of what we see as organic opportunities. And when you look at them, the IRRs on these can be very high. I mean, if you build it yourself versus monetizing somebody else's sweat, it really can be very interesting. It adds a little risk because there's a little less certainty about what the outcome is going to be. But if we can have 3 or 4 or 5 of those, and the more we've focused on that, the longer that list has become, and it's made it more difficult for the CFO, frankly, to prioritize exactly where we should go. So I think the volatility and as I've told my employees before, capitalism really stinks. It's really hard. And you just constantly have to get better or somebody else is going to just chew you apart. And you just have to recognize that. But it does make it exciting. And the need for continuous improvement, you just can't rest very long because there's somebody right there. And so I think through this cycle, I'm a firm believer if we stay really disciplined and stick to our plans to re-engineer our businesses and make them as efficient as we possibly can. Did I go over time?
No, doing the business.
That was it?
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, there's somebody from the business on the re-engineering side.
Yeah. People being taken out and shot. And anyway, sorry.
But you know,
Please go on.
I think you got to take advantage of these kind of times to do some of this, and so that's what we've been working on.
Just on the people side of globalization, I had a job. I worked in Frankfurt for 2 years in a pure operational job, kind of like you, and those operational jobs are hard.
I thought you would say fun.
Yeah, no, they're definitely.
Daily sweat.
It really is a daily sweat. And making those numbers, and pipeline, and everything else. But I remember my first meeting in Germany, and I sat down with my senior team, and most could speak English, a little bit English, and I went to the whiteboard and said, here's our big strategy, and here's where we're going to go. And they're looking at me like, you Americans always start with a strategy. You know, what am I going to do tomorrow? So I think part of the issue is, and this is for M&A or it's any new place you go, you really have to understand the culture. And what works in one place may not work in another place. So, I mean, I can't think if I'm not on the whiteboard, and, you know, I love creating strategies to get people excited, but they wanted to know what their job was. And in that culture, you talk to your boss, you didn't talk to your peers much. So everything kind of went up and down like this, and they were like, and they're fantastic at executing once you told them exactly what to do. So I think part of the issue is whether it's M&A or a new territory or a new whatever, understanding the culture, understanding the local nuances, just because what works in one place may not work in another. It was interesting.
That is
the people side of it.
Indeed. I wonder if I could maybe throw it open to the floor. If anyone has any questions, comments, observations, anything. No one got any? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, take a mic.
Now, you're all with fairly large companies. I'm with a mid-sized company. But one of the things I see a lot of companies struggling with, particularly CFOs, is the segmentation of businesses and measuring real sort of business or product line profitability. Yeah. And you tend to have, when you have like P&L owners in a business, there's a lot of controversy when there's allocation of overheads. And I actually think, you know, for people in, I don't know, maybe SAP or Oracle or something, there's probably an opportunity here to offer a better product out, because I'm telling you, I know a lot of people in, you know, $500 to $1 billion companies that still struggle with this. So I just wondered if you had any sort of recommendations or thoughts from a CFO perspective as it relates to dealing with that challenge, because it tends to get very political, and sometimes I think in a company that's growing, you can shift a lot of overhead to businesses that are sort of early stage and getting kind of distorted P&Ls, and it can cause a lot of controversy and poor decision making. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or suggestions on that front.
That is a very interesting issue. I don't think I'm giving too much away if I were to reveal that we sometimes have debates inside the Financial Times about exactly that issue. But anyway, any thoughts?
I'll be happy to start on that one. I think, first of all, as the finance officer, you are the arbiter. And so I think it is your responsibility for ultimately making whatever the allocation decisions are going to be using the best information that you've got. So what we've done in our teams is, A, make sure that we can put as much transparency as we can. So we actually invested quite a bit in our allocation system. and we made it as transparent to the segment CFOs as it possibly can be, so they can look at, if they get an allocation, they see the actual people that is allocated to them and the cost associated with them. And we feel it's important to do that because they have to have an impact. They're also demanding those services, and they have to have an impact on those shared service costs. But the political point of it, you've got to make it apolitical. It's got to, at the end of the day, you've got to hear what the scenario is, what the situation is, and you've got to make the decision.
Other thoughts on that one? Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree. Transparency is key. The biggest complaint we get is black box allocation. I don't know where this came from. You know, it can't be value added, et cetera. So the problem is that to build those systems is really expensive. I know that. I built one that didn't work, and I'm now building another one that my fingers are crossed that it will work, but it's been a real slog. It's been almost as much of an effort as putting in an ERP. And so one thing you can do is force your business people to understand what's being allocated, force them to understand the whole bucket, so what all these indirect costs are, and then some sense for why they're getting, you know, a portion of it. That usually helps, because what I tend to have to arbitrate is, well, why are the indirect costs going up? And I'll say, well, you're doubling your CapEx plan, and we're adding a few more people in engineering and purchasing. Don't you think that makes sense? And so you have to go through that, and I'm sure you've done it yourself. But really, you know, having them understand, whether it's once a year, twice a year, here's what all these indirect costs are, here's the activities that it supports, doesn't need to be real detailed, usually gives those GMs, those business managers, a sense for what those costs are, and I tend to see the complaints go away.
Jim?
I am personally not a big fan of allocations at all. Way too much time is spent internally on it. I've worked in manufacturing companies, so obviously, you know, for overhead allocation stuff, you got to do it. But I'm not a big fan of it. What I like to do is get the whole management team in the budget process. How much is finance going to spend? How much is HR going to spend? How much is IT going to spend? How much is the supply chain going to spend? Have all the tough discussions there at a company level. And then the argument is, well, I need to have fully allocated costs. You know, if you have inventory, et cetera, like some of these guys, obviously it's important, but you can get to competitive analogs at a pretty high level. So I like to know who signs the vouchers, who signs the expense reports, who pays the people, because that's who I can hold accountable. So I think you got to balance those two. So on one hand, competitive analogs and pricing, it's obviously very important. The other hand, though, is who do you hold accountable? And for me, I have a lot of gray hair, so I've worked this a lot. I would rather look somebody in the eye and say, you approved it, I'm going to hold you accountable. So to me, I lean more toward that than fully allocated, nobody's in charge. So I think you got to basically decide in your own culture, you know, which one's more important. You know, and obviously you got to have fully burdened costs in manufacturing environments. But I like the concept of own expense, and I'd say it's an and. So you can do the fully allocated stuff, but and have who incurred the expense at the very beginning before it all gets moved around. Because it's so, I mean, you know how management meetings are like this, you know, it's your cost, it's my cost. I like to say, you hired the person and you signed the expense report. And I find once I do that, I have to arbitrate a lot less.
BK, thoughts on this one?
No, I think I agree with that. In my view, just making it far more transparent and making it as apolitical as possible.
I think that's very good, though. We've given you a variety of answers to that one. You can pick whichever approach you find most appealing. Exactly. Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Yeah, we have a question there, I think. Thanks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So this is, so I agree with everything being said about CFO's role changing and becoming more like a COO role, like a general manager. The question is more about the style of a CFO and how do you get things done. So there are kind of two kinds of approaches. There may be more for sake of simplicity. One approach is get these things done. I don't care too much about how you do it, but get these things done because I'm the CFO or COO, and and I like those things to be done because that add value to the shareholders. The other thing is what some of you talked about it is get more involved in the business and try to empathize more with the business. And then may make you a little bit softer, but that's the other approach. Listen, I understand your business, you still have to do it, but more empathy with the business. So there are two kinds of approaches. One, I don't care, get it done. The other is, I empathize with the business, maybe you're able to do it, but try your best kind of things. Do you guys have a view of what is more effective way of dealing or becoming a CFO or a CEO in a newer world? Because I deal with a lot, and I have a point of view, but I'd like to hear from you and the others in this room, and what's more emerging.
Interesting thoughts on that. And I mean, do you recognise that characterisation of the two approaches?
You know, it's a fascinating question, and it really depends on how much credibility you have in your organization and how your organization responds. So I sometimes can get a lot more out of people by being empathetic than being demanding. But there are points in time where you have to drop the hammer. But it's a really great question because it's how you moderate your style to get done what you know needs to get done. I think the strange thing for me, though, is I've been at the company 15 years, so I kind of know everybody. And so people know me, and they know when I really need something or when I can be more flexible. I would find it very difficult to walk into a new organization, I think, because at that point then, I just think it would be a very different situation, and I might have to behave in a different way.
For me, I've been at my company now about 6 years, and I agree. I mean, when you go into a new place, it's hard. I think people love to admire the problem, and people like to be right. I always tell people, be effective, not right. Now, on laws and stuff, you got to be right. But I have found the most effective thing is align on the business problem you're trying to solve. Not the symptoms, you know, not this or that, but what really is at the heart of the business problem. And I think, so get rid of the pseudo jargon, you know, don't talk in rev rec kind of things. Just what is the business problem we're trying to solve? Most people, at least in my experience, and I've worked in very different industries, once you talk in the business problem language, focused on the customer or whatever it is, I think it's much easier to get alignment. Once you have alignment, then you can move a lot faster. But if it's, you know, if it's my way or the highway, and I have to be right, not effective. So I'd say being effective, not right, except when you have to be right, because there are times when you got to be right. That's just the law. But aligning on the business problem and using that common language, at least in my 30 years of doing this stuff, that is the most effective because that moves things faster and gets all the junk out of the way. And the other thing I've learned is I never tell an operational person I know more about their job than they do, because I know I don't. And as soon as you tell somebody, you know, kind of talking down at them, it's tough. But aligning on the business problem, if I had to pick one thing, is what I have found to be the most effective.
Todd?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a great point, and I think that the comment on effective rather than right, and it's a little bit counter to what natural human behavior, and I think as you work with your own and coach your own team, I would strongly, when you identify that where somebody is. And I just had a situation with a relatively senior person, and they couldn't help but go back to somebody that needed authority to get something done to explain that he was right. And I said, you know, why did you do that? Because it's not going to be effective. You've slowed down the process, and you've lost your ability to be effective, even if you were right. So it didn't really matter if the goal is to be effective, driving home the point that you were right. But getting a little more specific to the point. I've heard consultants say that I believe the ratio is you're supposed to have 3.5 positives to every negative comment that you give an employee. I have not been able to attain that.
Have you even made 3.4?
I've got something, and there's an employee here today, so he can. I've got something on my computer screen that says positive reinforcement, just to remind me that. But I think when it comes to the actual decision-making process, there's a golf psychologist that has come up with this. But I think he uses it for CEOs. He used to be a schizophrenic psychologist. Now he teaches golf and CEOs. But what he said is there are basically three things in business that you need to do. One, as a leader. One is you've got to make a decision. So you use all the data, you use whatever it is that you're going to make a decision, but you make a decision. And the second thing you do is you communicate that. You clearly communicate it to whoever the powers that may be. And the third thing is you delegate. You get out of the way and you let people execute. You don't force them. You let them execute, and they'll want to. Occasionally, they're going to need some feedback. They're going to need some, whether it's positive or negative criticism. But I think that's where effective organizations go. So there's a deep understanding. That's what we talked about at the very beginning. A deep understanding of the operations in the process, clear communication, and then let your team run.
Okay. You were saying, as you had a view. What's your view?
No, I think that was said. I think it's situational in some respect, but you got to be in the game. You can't be right in every situation which are more judgmental. I think you got to be more effective. So view is having empathy to a point, understanding what problems you're trying to solve will get you a longer, better results, sustainable results over a period of time. Short term, it may cause problems. It may delay getting to a point, but I think longer term is a more sustainable point of view. Is kind of what I think.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, there's one over there. Thank you.
Hi. I'd like the panel's views in terms of comparing and contrasting the pace of innovation and disruptive change within the CFO function as opposed to other functions like production, sales, marketing, where I think it seems a bit more apparent and obvious.
That's an interesting thought. Is that, I mean, the implication lying behind that, I mean, do you think would you imagine there's less change for CFOs than for other functions?
That is my biased opinion. I mean, we seem to function, I am part of the same clan, function about the same way as we did 50 years ago or something like that.
Interesting. Well, any thoughts?
Well, we are, I've talked earlier about re-engineering operations, both in our company and our businesses, but we're, I would say, probably ahead of the process in finance. So I do think finance is changing and making it so. We're certainly working hard to do that, making ourselves more efficient. So we've identified, for example, global process owners within finance. And they own a process from whether it's what we call record to report, from beginning to end globally, so that we make sure that we streamline it. And there's a continuous improvement process, so we constantly are getting better. So we're efficient, and we're improving that efficiency. We do the same thing on what we call inform to manage, so our management accounting process. So we've got a global owner of the process itself. So and that's no different than what we might be doing in our operations, where we would have global process owners there. So I do think we are innovating, adopting best practices for the operations that we have. And that pyramid that we talked about, so the more that we can simplify and make the bottom of the pyramid efficient, the more time that we can promote the advisory part of the job, which is not only the most interesting component of it, it's where we can be most effective in adding value to the organization. So I think finance organizations, from what I've seen, are changing and changing pretty quickly.
Thank you. Other thoughts on that one?
I would agree. I think I see actually in many of these organizations, finance actually at the cutting edge of the change. While there are so for example, you think of mobility, you think of digital media, it is impacting many different functions, not directly finance. However, finance is inflicting change on itself in many organizations that we see to be at the cutting edge and, in fact, within organizations seen as a function, as a go-to and become a role model within various functions. And then because one of the key being how do you have the information travel fast? How do you have the insights travel fast? And thereby bringing far more foresight and far more intelligence in the process, intelligence in the business decision making. So I think what we see is finance actually more at the cutting edge and thinking more about future and propelling other functions.
I would take it one step further. I think it's an overused strength of finance organizations. I think we are so much, I mean, we have to be perfect before we go to somebody else. You know that kind of feeling. And I'm sure a lot of you have this feeling. You do an ERP implementation, finance almost always gets done first. So and is that good or bad? It really depends. So I think it can be an overused strength if it's not done in the context of the whole business. Again, my context of operational cause equals financial effect. You don't want to change for change's sake. You want to know why you're doing it, and you want to know the impact on the business. So I think, if anything, we probably change too much and too fast. But that's kind of who we are. That's who we are as finance people. You just got to, whatever we do, though, it's got to be in service of that business. And we got to make sure we see that connection.
That's interesting. And I thought Eddie, you've been changing too fast?
Yeah,
I think that's a...
The only other thing I would add to it is, I think finance is very much a driver of change, whether it's within our own function or throughout the organization. Whereas I don't see a lot of other functions driving change outside their own organization. And so we're kind of responsible for that. We have this charge to drive change for efficiency, for cost reduction, for productivity. As a function itself, I do think that we're also changing, but there is an element that we lock down. Some of our processes are locked down for regulatory reasons, for reporting reasons, for, finance people, the monthly close, it's a thing. They do it, they love it, they miss all the holidays, it's in their blood. Love it. My guys love it. It's in their blood.
Or you make them love it.
But and sorry, Jim, just to pick up on that, because I thought that was a very striking thing you said about changing too much. I mean, to be clear about that, why is that then? What's that?
If you're changing for change's sake because you want to be the best finance team, but it's not improving the business and you don't know the connection of the business, so I think you have to change, like you were talking end to end. I like that, from the source document all the way to the reporting. That has to be in service of moving the business forward. It's not just about finance. Because if it is, then you have your mind on the bottom of the value triangle, not the top, which is the strategic partner. So you have to be able to describe to somebody why you're doing it and how it's good for the business. Less cost is almost always good, but not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're underinvested in things,
Yeah.
IT or whatever.
Yeah. Thank you. One over there.
So a quick question on how you build speed of reaction in your organizations. And of course, one of the countermeasures to volatility is to create an organization that reacts faster to the environment. That isn't what most organizations' forte used to be, because we had a more stable environment. How is the finance function? And I really wouldn't like to have a view in terms of what you're building for the future ERP implementations. Rather, how are you building an organization that is able, within a matter of weeks, to change resource allocation, to change allocation of capital, to change budgetary constraints, above and beyond what your function does, but really what your function does to the rest of the company, because you can actually drive the reallocation of resources much faster. Can you give some concrete examples of how you're building the organization of the future? Unfortunately, volatility is going to be structural for some time, so organizations that react faster probably will have the upper hand. It'll be interesting to see what you're building there.
Very, very interesting question, and perhaps subsidiary to the point about too much change. Can you have too much responsiveness and too much flexibility and too much reaction, too much of a quick reaction? But Jim, you thought about that?
The way I think about my team, I ran track in high school and college. And in high school, I was part of a national record team. and it still stands to today. It was 1972, tells you how old I am. I personally could have run backwards. I really could have. The guy who anchored the relay, distance medley, broke Jim Ryan's indoor record. He ran an anchor mile 3:58.5 in high school. But I passed the baton in the passing zone, and I did not drop it. So as I think about, I was lucky to be part of a fantastic team. I ran my heart out, don't get me wrong, but it didn't matter. So as I think about my team, I get them to think about the relay race, and this is about driving the business. You got to know the business. You got to practice with your operational people. You need the heartbeat of what's going on, and you got to have very few layers. But the relay team is the analogy I use, where you got to practice with each other, and you got to know where the handoffs are. It's kind of the boundaries that free you. Inside these boundaries go crazy, but here's the boundaries, and that's where the baton gets handed off. So I think you are faster if you practice with somebody. You are faster if you know each other's roles, and you are faster if there's less of you. So in my view, I run IT and finance and a number of other organizations. I keep my organization as flat as I possibly can. So, and in the context of a team, if I have an issue of accounting, my treasurer knows about it, my head of insurance knows about it, my IT guy knows about it, they all know about it. And not everybody can know everything, but they all know enough where it doesn't have to be, Mr. CIO do this, Mr. Controller do that. They know each other well enough that they naturally do things. So I think the team playing with each other, a lot less layers, and the team playing with operations and practicing a lot. This way it's intuitive, it's second nature. You don't need a committee meeting, you don't need an act of Congress. God knows we need an act of Congress. But I think just good old-fashioned playing together. The other analogy I use is like, any sports team. I want players and coaches. Yes, I need one or two reporters because I have K's and Q's to do. But, I want players and coaches. I want everybody on the field. But that means you got to force yourself for very lean and mean organizations, and you got to practice together. So that's just kind of my life lesson for.
Other thoughts on that? Todd,
yeah, this is something over the past 2 years that we've spent some time thinking about, and I can't say we've got it exactly right, but we realize that when there are initiatives in the organizations that need to be evaluated, and then you need to make a decision whether it's a go or no go. We've taken the discipline that we had around, we were a fairly acquisitive company for a while, so we took that discipline and we tried to apply it in a similar fashion across our decision making around various investment or opportunities that we've had. And it gets back to that theme of being effective, focusing on being effective rather than simply being right. You want to be right, but you want to make sure that that the businesses respect the process as well, and that's not easy to do. People would rather see an idea and run with it, and before they've necessarily given it an adequate evaluation, and suddenly you've got a bunch of money invested and you're nowhere. So I think you do have to have a right amount of bureaucracy in the process, but you need to do it in a way, and we even give it cute names like initiative, I forget what we call it now, but something that makes it faster. Well, it doesn't make it faster. You got to bring it through a bureaucratic process to get it approved. But we're trying to streamline that so that the businesses know what to expect, and they bring it to the table, and we can proceed pretty quickly right to the CEO. Is this something? Do we want to go for this? And he knows the kind of analysis he's going to get. He knows the review that he's going to. He knows it's going to be a transparent review of it that's independent. And can therefore make a relatively quick decision. So I'd love to be able to say we could eliminate the bureaucracy, have a single point instant decision, but I don't think we'd be serving our shareholders all that well to do that.
Eddie, maybe one for you, just to pick up on, as I say, my proposal, which no one is so far biting on, that you can be too flexible and too responsive. When you talk about making investments for 50 years,
yep.
You presumably, as I say, you don't want to be making kind of week-to-week decisions on those.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take a step back and kind of see through some of the volatility. We're in the midst of building a new greenfield plant in China today. It'll be done at the end of this year. And we've grown really well in China. We were in China before Tiananmen Square with assets in the ground. We have 3 world-scale plants there, and we're building a 4th. Now, people look at me today and say, well, geez, hasn't China stopped? Hasn't it slowing down? Should you keep building? And you have to take a step back and recognize, okay, China continues to grow, quite frankly, at a much higher rate than most other places. It's a consolidating market. We want to be there at the end when it's consolidated. There aren't a whole lot of markets that are still consolidating. And so we will continue on that pace. So we're not going to make a knee-jerk reaction to change that course. Typically, you can do things, though, pace investments, if you truly believe that over the next 3, 4, 5 years, things aren't going to pan out the way you had thought they might pan out a year or 2 ago. So you might do that a little bit differently. But it really gets back to really understanding your market, the need for your products, how much you think they'll be demanded, how much you think they'll be used, how much of it is non-discretionary, how much of it is discretionary. And that's the way we sort of think about these investments over longer periods.
And BK, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think, is there a general trend in business in America or globally in terms of moving towards faster reaction times, increased flexibility in financial decision making?
I actually, as I experience it, actually being disciplined about the processes increases agility.
Right.
And it is counterintuitive, but being very disciplined about it, and you said it,
it's a great point. Great point.
And it actually increases agility. And the analogy that comes in my head, if it's a really bad weather, and you're going to fly a plane, and the plane is already delayed, you don't forget the checklist. You just don't say, let's fly. You still go through the checklist. So being disciplined actually increases agility. It is not that intuitive.
I think we maybe have time for just one more. Yes, there's one. Did anyone else, if we had 2 quick ones, but but why don't we take 2 together then, because we are nearly out of time. And then you, if there's, one there.
I was wondering, what role have advances in business analytics played in your organizations as far as driving performance, both in terms of the richness, let's say, of the analytics, and maybe the methods and technologies by which they're served up to key decision makers?
Thanks very much. And then the final question, I think, over here.
Just a different kind of a question. You all have talked of CFOs adding a lot of value to businesses. 2 questions, really. Should a CFO do a business role before he or she becomes CFO? And do you see in the future CFOs become CEOs because of the experience they've just gone through?
Very interesting. And I was just wondering about exactly, as we were talking earlier, I was wondering about exactly that metric in terms of the number of CFOs that become CEOs, wondering whether there's a trend there, or whether that is becoming more common than it used to be. I'm not sure.
Well, I would strongly encourage it if you can do it. It makes a lot of sense. I don't mean becoming CEO. I mean doing a business job. And I think the people on our executive team appreciate what I bring. The business guys on our executive team appreciate what I bring to the table, having been in their shoes. It really helps a lot. It's not the easiest thing to do, but if you can manage it. And it doesn't have to be the head of a business. It just might be a different role outside of finance, more business-oriented, maybe a commercial role or a business development role or something like that. I do think that would enrich your toolkit.
Sorry, just to pick up on that other point about business analytics, new techniques, new things that people are doing, and thoughts?
I just think one thing, and it's pretty old-fashioned, it's tagging every source document with the codes you need up front, geography, vertical market, customer, et cetera, and kind of creating a Rubik's Cube where you can be organizationally agnostic and look at your business maybe through a vertical set of markets, a geographic set of markets, a trade or whatever you call, and looking at the various cuts. I think that creates a much more robust discussion So that technology is really important. It really gets down to the process discipline of doing it right the first time and capturing the data, and that creates a lot of agility too. So I mean that's one thing. Just the Rubik's Cube kind of data thing is something that we're doing with our current technology.
Other thoughts on that? And
I think also the speed of getting information is just getting much faster. You can get it weekly if you want it, and the quality of information, depending on how strong your systems are, particularly if you're operating globally, you can operate now literally on one instance where China, Japan, and the U.S. are all running on the same instance. That's kind of nice for the business environment. I do think it's improving. How we use it is probably the most important thing.
Thank you. And then perhaps back to where we came in just a moment ago. CEOs as former CFOs becoming CEOs. Is this
I think it's
something
the worst nightmare for the next CFO.
anyone here prepared to express an opinion on?
Well, I think the statistics point out that you are seeing a number of CFOs. Right. I mean, it's a pretty high percentage, especially recently, and I think the trend's going more in that direction. But the earlier point, I do think business experience is very helpful to a CFO, and as you could hear all of us discuss, and I don't know how many of us are accountants on this panel, but probably not that many. Most of us have had business experience. We have enough accounting experience to be dangerous. And I think that in order to become an advisor in a strategic role, that's the kind of background that you would, I think you'd want to have. Because we kept getting back to it, and Jim, you started it. In order to be effective, you need a deep understanding of the operations of the business. Well, to have a deep understanding of the operations of the business, if you actually run a business, it's much easier to actually really feel that.
And BK, maybe final thought from you was you're not actually a CFO yourself. You can give an unbiased view on this one. What do you think about these career paths?
No, so increasingly, we see that trend more and more happening, and I believe for the right reasons. Just because the vantage point increases more, and the apoliticalness also increases because I think that's an important point. I personally, have observed that business is almost as getting to must as compared to just being an accountant and, hey, now I'm being the CFO.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's a great thought to end on. It's been a fascinating evening for me. I hope you've all very much enjoyed it as well and has found it as useful and interesting and entertaining as I have. And thank you all very much indeed for coming along. Thanks especially to our panel, Jim Lusk, Eduardo Cordero, BK Callerer, and Todd Gibbons. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you.